Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening as we welcome you to Voices in the Game. We're going to have a fun episode today with our guests. If you have been a Pittsburgh sports fan, I'm sure you might know who our guest is on today's episode. He has been covering Pittsburgh sports for over 20 years. He's a columnist, he's a radio host, he's a podcast host, and he's also the play-by-play announcer for Duquesne football, Duquesne basketball on TV, and also Robert Morris hockey. He is Mr. Tim Benz. Tim, how are you doing? Thank you so much for coming on.
Golden, thanks for having me. How you doing?
Good, Tim. How are you? I am so honored to have you on. It's going to be a fun episode.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Looking forward to it. Appreciate you thinking of me, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk.
Of course, Tim, it's my pleasure. So I would love to get started, Tim, with your start in the business. Where and when did you first gain the inspiration into wanting to be a sportscaster?
Yeah, I always had a love for sports, and I very quickly realized that the Steelers probably weren't going to draft a 5'6", 110-pound quarterback. So I quickly shifted gears and decided it was time to come up with something else sports related that I could do, that I wanted to do, that I wanted to be a part of. And broadcasting was it. I grew up a huge Pittsburgh sports fan, even though I didn't live in the Pittsburgh area. I actually grew up in Connecticut. So my dad was a Pittsburgher. He was born here and grew up with a lot of fandom for all of the local sports teams here. So I was born into that. I adopted that. And I was a maniacal Pittsburgh sports fan as a kid, and it's always something I wanted to do was to cover sports. So I decided that at a young age, when I was very quick to realize that professional sports as a player was not going to be my path, and this is the way to go. I knew I wanted to go to Syracuse when I was probably in the 8th grade. They had a great broadcasting program. There were a lot of kids that were from Connecticut, right across the Sound in Long Island, northern Jersey, that went to Syracuse. I knew of its reputation. I grew up listening to WFAN sports talk radio. It came through clear as a bell from New York City to where I lived in Connecticut. So I knew how many Syracuse guys were on the air there. It was frequently talked about, and I thought, well, that's a good place that could not only give me a college degree, but also sort of act as a 4-year internship to maybe get a job when I got out of school. And sure enough, that's how things went. I was very fortunate in that regard, but that's kind of how I got my career started. And to your question, the inspiration for it was to stay within the sports realm, but, understanding at a young age, I was not going to be able to be a guy on the field, so I might as well talk about the guys on the field.
How was that like for you, Tim, first breaking into the business after you graduated from Syracuse?
Yeah, it was not all that dissimilar to what I'm doing now. I had a bunch of different jobs and, kind of kept my hand in as many pies as possible. My main gig right out of school, and I was lucky to have a job right out of school. They weren't falling off of trees, so I felt very lucky to get one. But I'd worked at a college radio station, WAER Radio in Syracuse, doing sports. They created that year, luckily enough, what amounted to like an externship program. It was a job that you could apply for. It was on the news reporting side. And they knew I was a sports guy. They didn't know if I could do news. I talked them into saying I could do news. And sure enough, they gave me the gig. And it was great being 21 years old and having Syracuse University health benefits. That's all I cared about. And I had health insurance, and I had good health insurance. And between that job and I was working part-time as a sports anchor and reporter at Channel 3 in Syracuse, WSTM, and they started a sports talk station, 1260 WNSS, which at the time was strictly bringing in satellite sports radio, and I would just do updates. But I was doing 3 jobs at once, ostensibly. And again, not all that dissimilar for what I'm doing now, strangely enough that I think of it that way. But, I was making $30,000 a year as a 21-year-old in Syracuse, New York back in 1996. I thought I was rich. I thought this is great. So it worked out very nicely for me. Eventually that externship turned into a full-time job. So I was doing news full-time for my first gig and then sports on the side. And eventually, after about 2.5 years of doing that, I had a buddy that I went to college with who let me know that there was a job opening for a full-time sports gig in Salt Lake City. And I applied for that, got it, took a 50% pay cut to get into sports full time, loaded up my car, drove across from Syracuse to Salt Lake City, and was getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning to produce the morning show out in Salt Lake, and then do a weekend sports talk show. So I was doing a little on air, a lot of producing, and then just steadily moved up the ladder from there. Went to Columbus, Ohio as the afternoon sports talk guy on 1460 WBNS, which is the flagship for Ohio State and the Columbus Blue Jackets in their inaugural season. I was there for about a year and a half, 2 football seasons, and then came to Pittsburgh in 2001, the same year the new stadiums opened up. And like you said, I've been living here ever since. I did have a tour stop in Boston for a little bit. I went to Boston for about a year and a half, but I never moved from Pittsburgh. I still had a home here. My wife never moved from Pittsburgh to Boston, so I kept the home here. And then because of that living arrangement, it didn't work out in Boston. And I came back to Pittsburgh happily. I never should have left. I was always happier here doing what I'm doing here, and here I am still the year 2025. So like you said, it's been, to think that it's been that long since those stadiums opened, and I've been covering them every game since they opened, it kind of smacks me in the face when you put it that way.
Yeah, that is all amazing, Tim. And then moving forward, to all the stuff that you do today, whether it's your column, your podcast, or filling in for Mark Madden on his radio show on 105.9 The X. How is it like preparing for all of those shows, especially, your podcasts and filling in for Mark, because I'm sure it's a lot of work getting ready for the shows.
Yeah, it's amazing how much you can use something from one platform and apply it to the other platform. I don't know if I'd be able to do it if I couldn't, using sound bites to guide topics, using interviews that I might tape up on the podcast side and apply to Mark's show, or tape up something on Mark's show that I can then use and double up on the podcast side. My podcast is on the iHeartRadio platform, so there's no issues there. It's cross-promotion, honestly. It's good for the goose, good for the gander type of deal. So that's good. If I fill in the morning on the DV morning show, I'll take sound bites that I have from those interviews and apply them accordingly on the DVE side. So yeah, there's a lot of that. And if I had to do something fresh all the time, every day, with no overlap at all, I don't know if I'd be able to keep up. I can barely keep up as it is. But that certainly does help, because there's only so many hours in a day and so many days in a week. I often joke that this time of year, and by this time of year, I mean basically from when training camp starts in mid-July until college hockey and college basketball season are over, it's one long week broken up by a series of short naps. I don't even have days. I just sort of nap my way through the week. And then when the football game is over at the end of the given week, maybe I can get some shut-eye for a couple hours and then restart again. So it's hectic. It's a hectic time of year.
Yeah, that was actually one of my questions I had, Tim. So, how is that like having to juggle, like you mentioned, in the months of around November, December, and January? Because you got Robert Morris hockey, Duquesne basketball, and then you got the Steelers and the Penguins all at the same time.
Yeah, I can't do every game. I cover every Steelers game for sure, because that's my main job, is to work for Trib Live and to be a columnist for Trib Live. So because of that, Steelers games come first. So anything else that happens that conflicts with those, I have to take a back seat, because so much coverage for me is generated around the Steelers. But I can't do every game, and they understand that. Honestly, I mean, they'll tell you the same thing. I mean, it's not like they're paying me enough that I have to be beholden to one of those teams or schools for every contest, because it's a part-time job. They know it. It's not like I'm working for the university in a full-time capacity or everything. So, I might miss a Robert Morris game for a Duquesne game. I might miss a Duquesne game for a Robert Morris game. I try to not to miss too many of any of them. When I work for 970 during the week, when I have my Monday show and my Wednesday show on Fox Sports Pittsburgh 970, there might be times where I need to get a co-host to fill in for me, or I might need somebody to fill in for a Duquesne game. But like I said, those are all part-time gigs, and they get it. They can have me for as often as I can make myself available, and that's 85 to 90% of the time in each case. And I'll never sacrifice one for the other completely. And, when it comes to prep and things like that, would I be better at any one thing that I do if I was just doing that? Absolutely. Absolutely. If I could just, prep for a full Duquesne football game, like, Monday Night Football announcers prep for a full week for Monday Night Football or Sunday Night Football, I think I'd be a great play-by-play guy, but I can't, it's my main job is to pump out 15 stories a week for the Trib. So that takes the most of my time, and then you fit in everything else around that. So would I be a better radio show host if I was just doing radio? Yes. Would I, be happy full-time in radio again, not writing? No, probably not. I mean, I've never been happier with a full-time job than what I have right now at the Trib. I can tell you that. And that's partially because of who I work for, the bosses that I have, the amount of latitude and space that I'm given, which in a creative realm is something you cherish. And I consider that to be the most important thing that they provide for me that I've never had to this degree before. So, you figure it out. You nap when you can. You try to not sacrifice any one entity for anything else. And if you have to, then eventually you have to let it go. But yeah, it's amazing how much time you would think like a 20-minute podcast would only last, we're doing it right now, but it's not just 20 minutes. It's booking, it's calling, it's scheduling, it's editing, it's posting, it's uploading, it's promoting. That's 3 hours in a day right there. Maybe not for a 20-minute podcast, but if you do 3 of them like I did yesterday, it's a couple hours, all things said at the end of the day.
And then moving on to, like you mentioned, the play-by-play duties you have. So what are some of your favorite memories, down the line with calling Duquesne football, calling Duquesne basketball, and also calling Robert Morris hockey?
I guess I'll start with Duquesne basketball because in terms of great memories, the freshest one is them going to the NCAA tournament for the first time since the 1970s. And what a miracle ride that was. And I hopped on those calls by complete accident. They had a personnel issue for the engineering and color duties alongside Ray Goss, who's been doing Duquesne play-by-play since, they were Peach Baskets. Ray's a legend. And here I am walking into the A10 tournament with Ray 2 years ago. And, I just thought, okay, Duquesne had a nice season. They're pretty good. They got hot at the end. I thought they'd win their first round game, but they got Dayton. They're going to draw Dayton in the second round. Nice trip to Brooklyn. I haven't been to New York for a while. This is great. Sure enough, they upset Dayton. They win the next 2 games. You remember the confetti game when the confetti was falling down accidentally in the middle of the A10 tournament. And then we're on a plane a couple days later to Omaha. I'm like, how did I step into this? It was history making for the college. It was history making for the program. The city was into it, and I was on the carpet ride with Ray out of nowhere. I had no idea it was coming, and it was in a pinch. They needed somebody to help out. I said I'd do it. I love March Madness. I'm in. I had no idea how long I'd be in for, and then they won a game when they were in Omaha, believe it or not, beating BYU. So it was a blast. The story I always tell that went along with this is just sort of a broadcaster, in the trenches kind of story. When they played in the semifinals, they played the second game of the semifinals against the Bonnies. And the game before that was the VCU game. I think they were playing St. Joe's. And I was setting up the equipment, and I was looking, and I was like, why is the battery so low? What's going on with the battery? I had it up for 20 minutes, and it was almost done. I'm like, I'm plugged in. What's going on here? And I looked, and the power pack was frayed in the back. Like, the wires were frayed. I said, oh, my God, we're going to run out of battery. I don't know what I'm going to do here. So, in the middle of halftime of the VCU game, after I was setting up, I went up to the VCU guys. I was like, hey, look, if you guys win this game, because we're staying at the same hotel, do you mind if I steal your power pack so we can get through our broadcast, and I'll bring it back to you at the hotel? And they said, sure, but we got to win. So I'm like, I'm openly rooting for VCU to win this game because I hadn't been able to get to the other side of the arena to talk to the St. Joe's guys. Thankfully, and they had the wrong equipment too. The VCU guys had the same equipment as us. So mercifully, they won. I stole their power pack. We were able to get the game on the air. We broadcast that game. But then I got to figure out what to do for the finals because I got to give their power pack back to them because they're the opponent. And I'm freaking out. We're at Brooklyn Stadium, thankfully. Ian Eagle, who the voice of the NFL on CBS, and certainly the Final Four in March Madness. He's the best play-by-play guy in the biz, in my opinion. He was a Syracuse guy. I got to know him a little bit, even though he's a couple years older than me. He's great with the kids. He still is, even though he's a big star in the business. He was always great with us. And I had a little bit of a relationship with him, so I texted him because the Nets, who he also does in the meanwhile, they were on the road because the A-10 had taken over Brooklyn. So the Nets had like this extended road trip, and he was also prepping for March Madness. So I'm texting him feverishly. I'm like, is there anybody at the arena that might have this piece of equipment? So he's telling me to get in touch with this guy who's his usual producer, who's on a 2-week vacation now in Albany because they don't have a home game for 2 weeks. So, like, he's giving me instructions about how to climb through the catacombs of the Barclays Center to look for this one matching piece of equipment that I can find that'll be exactly what I need to get on the air. So, like, I'm there 5 hours before the championship game, and he's telling me, like, what plug to pull. It's completely pitch black in there. I'm using my phone light. I think I'm going to pull the plug on the whole arena. It was one of those, like, Lethal Weapon red wire, green wire things. I literally closed my eyes and pulled it and hoped I wasn't shutting down the whole arena. Fortunately, it was the right piece of equipment. I had it. The guys at Fordham, I contacted them. They've got a great student radio station. For as much as I love Syracuse and what we do, Fordham's is fantastic too. They hooked me up because I got in touch with them. So now I went from having no power pack to having 2 power packs. So I just took the one from Fordham because I wanted to plug the thing back in for the Barclays Center in case I also stole like their backup generator and I didn't know. So like that was the stress level I was at for the finals because, here's Duquesne in it for the first time since 1972 or whatever. And I don't know if I can keep the game on the air, so and it was my job to get the game on the air. And I just walked into this, and fortunately, we made it through. It was great. Then we get to Omaha, and their power strip didn't work in Omaha. So we had, the same sort of thing. I'm sweating. I'm just like, so I did like no prep for the game against, I did some prep for BYU, but like, the last minute crunch time stuff, your normal routine that you get in before the game. We're switching power packs again. We're switching ports. They're putting us in a different place. We're moving. It was chaos, but it was a lot of fun. So that's my best memory of them recently. My best memory for RMU hockey certainly was when they won the Atlantic Championship, our first year of doing it and going to the NCAA tournament. And then for Duquesne, for them to beat Youngstown State last year on the road, to beat a ranked FCS team, and they got another one coming in this weekend against Lehigh. That was a great game to call as well. So I've had a bunch of good memories for those programs packed into the short amount of time that I've been calling games. We stepped into it again with that hockey run too, man, when they got to Minnesota and went to the NCAA tournament. I think it's a Frozen Four before. I meant the NCAA tournament, but they won the Atlantic Frozen Four and then went to the NCAA tournament in Minnesota. So that was a blast on that end.
Yeah, that's all amazing, Tim. And how was that like for you, with getting the Robert Morris hockey program back after it went on that short hiatus a few years ago?
It was great. I mean, I was devastated when I found out it was leaving. That was in the aftermath of COVID. Remember, they had just come back and they split the divisions. They did something funky with the divisions that year, and they won the West Division of the Atlantic. So they had a good year. I'm pretty sure the women, because I don't do the women's games, but I think the women won the conference that year. So the program was good. You never saw it coming. And I knew that, like a lot of schools there having economic problems coming out of COVID and all that. I guess no one was ever surprised when something got cut, but that was a slap, and the circumstances under which the program was taken away were shady, to say the least. You saw the fallout from that. I'm not going to make any connections, but let's just say that there's new management in place at the store, and I'm happy about that. And I think cooler heads prevailed and figured out that there was a way to get the team back, and I'm thankful that was the case because that was going to be a hole for me. I mean, I love doing hockey play-by-play. It's the first real play-by-play gig that I had. I mean, I dabbled here and there. I did some stuff for high school, but I did a lot of sideline for high school. So the first true play-by-play gig I had was Robert Morris hockey. So a little piece of me would have gone away if that program had stayed away forever. And I'm glad the hiatus was as short as it was. And Derek Schooley and a lot of other people, Logan Biddle on the women's side, worked their tails off to get those programs back and running again. And they had a lot of help. And, I'm glad I could be a part of the coverage that sort of shined a light on where there were missteps along the way. And maybe that brought some eyes on the story that otherwise wouldn't have been there. And they were on the administration side inspired to bring back the team. And I'll leave it at that.
That is amazing, Tim. And one more question for you, regarding your career, something that, you have to do with the radio side, especially filling in for Madden, is having to interact with fans, with the call-in aspect of it. So how is that like dealing with fans, on your radio show and out in public? Because, with this time of year, fans can get extremely opinionated, especially with the Steelers right now.
99 out of 100 people you meet in public are great. I mean, I can count on one hand the amount of bad human interactions that I've had from a listener who walked up and said, I'm a listener, I don't like you, or I don't like what you do. I mean, it's like minimal, all right? Callers, everybody, and online, everybody's a lot bigger and bolder when they're on the other end of a phone or on the other end of a keyboard. So, that's tiresome, that's tedious. It's more so on social media. In every case, I think you use those things as tools. I was always taught to use the callers as a tool. Use them as a funny soundbite. Use them as an interesting topic. Everything that you have for your show should be seen as a tool. Use them as an interview, whatever. But whatever agenda that they have to call up with, you use that as an opportunity to make your show better. You never turn the show over to the callers. You could have a segment where you take calls. You could use part of a segment to take a call or two. But the way to deal with that is you use the caller to your advantage. So whether that's, lighting them up like a Christmas tree, or whether that's kind of poking fun at them, or maybe if it's having fun with them, which is something I thought we did real well when I was on the X Morning Show. We didn't do funny bits like the old school DVE morning show when I was hosting the show at the X. We didn't have Ralph the Cat, or, we didn't have Steely McBeam, or any of the other voices or things that they did. We used callers in and out of breaks as our comedy bits. And that became a self-fulfilling prophecy after a while. People would call and think they were funny, and they weren't, and then you made fun of them, and it was even funnier. Or people would call and genuinely think they were making a point, but they knew when they said something stupid and we were making fun of them, then we were just making fun of them and having fun with it, and it turned into a bit. So, that's my approach to any and all caller interaction, is just, if you're in a talk show environment, use the callers as a tool to make your show better. They're a prop, all right?
And finally for you, Tim, what is your biggest key of advice that you have for anybody who has an interest in working in the sports industry, especially with us on the broadcasting side?
You're talking about people that might just be coming out of school or might just be getting started?
A little bit of both.
Yeah, I mean, for people who are just coming out of school and just getting started, I would say be your own agent, diversify, write a little, do a little play-by-play, get used to being in front of the camera, get a tape together for TV, get a tape together for radio, do talk shows, do some reporting, do everything. Diversify, because if a job opens, you want to show that you have a skill set to get it. Even if it's not the perfect job for you at the time, get in the business, get your foot in the door, and then go from there. Like I said, I started off doing news reports on an NPR station. All right? So that's where I was now, and now I'm a sports columnist and a play-by-play guy and a talk show host. It's 180 degrees different, even though it's in the same field. It's radio, but it's a totally different thing. And now I'm in print more than I am anything else, digital, but you know what I mean. I'm writing. But you get your foot in the door, and then within that ecosystem of sports media, you can spread out and do a couple of different things. But plant the seed first that you can do something, and then let the industry figure out what you do best, and go from there. So that's the first thing I'd say. Get a tape together and be your own agent, because like one big thing that's different now than when I came out of school in '96 at SU is, some kids look for agents. I didn't, because you weren't going to make anything anyway. You didn't want to give away 15% of, like I said before, the $15,000 to $30,000 you're going to make with your first gig. You barely eat. You don't want to give some of that to an agent. But now it's completely unnecessary. You're doing it. You are your own agent with your own publicity for your YouTube channel. Be a promoter. It's kind of frowned upon back then, and you'll still find older people in the business. They'll be like, oh, they're a self-promoter, or, like they're trying to put themselves out there. Yeah, because you and your crappy companies aren't hiring anybody anymore. So everything's independent now. Like you could rely on companies, if they needed somebody to hire someone. Now it doesn't work like that anymore. Now if they got an opening, they just condense the jobs. So like, you've almost got to create your own business model. Learn how to do that. Like the one great regret that I have, if I could do it all over again, is I would learn more about the business side of the business and embrace my need to know that at a younger age. I'd take more business classes, things like that. I'd have a sharper mind in that regard. Looking back on it, you can't look at 30 years in a business and say, what's going to look like then? But, crystal ball, if I had it, I would definitely have taken more business classes and tried to develop my mind for that side of being in this workforce, because, maybe I'd be further along then. No one knew what social media was going to be in '96. When social media came along, even in 2009, when Twitter really blew it up, we didn't know what the business making aspect of that could be for a couple years. And, it's a lot of learning on the fly, but at least I would have had a better seed in my head about how to do it. So like that's some advice that I would give to younger people trying to get in the business.
Tim, thank you so much for coming on. This was a phenomenal episode. I really appreciate it, sharing all of your incredible stories. Thank you so much for coming on, Tim.
Anytime, man. Let's do it again in the future. All right.